This story is about a daughter-in-law who cut ties with her in-laws for 3 years. Tried to reconnect, but ended up cutting ties again. After her mother-in-law demanded an apology. What could have happened? Let's find out together. Please subscribe and like our channel.
It's been 3 years since I cut ties with my in-laws. My heart had softened a bit, and I tried to reconnect. But I've now resolved to keep my distance. I thought I could forgive my mother-in-law for the sake of my husband and children, but she hasn't changed. People really don't change, do they? After a long time, she lectured me about being dutiful, as if only the ones below her should serve their duties. I can't understand that. I'm writing this to hear your opinions. My mother-in-law seems to have always been a selfish person. I wonder if she was born full of selfishness. Everyone else should serve her with respect and duty. But she thinks she can speak and act without courtesy to anyone. According to her, she is a great mother and mother-in-law who has sacrificed for her family. In my eyes, she's a person who sacrificed her family for her own comfort. Meeting or even calling my mother-in-law was a great stress for me. I guess I just didn't like her. Every holiday season, my heart would race with stress a month in advance. If I had to visit my in-laws, I would be on edge for days before. At first, I didn't know why I was reacting this way. I wondered if it was because of my reluctance to deal with my in-laws, or if it was because of my bad personality causing this overreaction. I often heard from my family and friends that I was sensitive. My father-in-law is the complete opposite of my mother-in-law. Even though my mother-in-law, who has been a housewife all her life, didn't do household chores properly, my father-in-law never nagged. If something bothered him, he would do it himself. He was gentle with me. I tried to reconnect with them after 3 years because of my father-in-law. It wasn't 100 because of him, but I felt really sorry for him. My mother-in-law had been nagging me to call her every day since I got married. When I asked if I really had to call her every day, even though there was nothing to say, she said it was a daughter-in-law's duty. So I called her every day, but whenever I did, she seemed angry. Who would want to call someone who speaks as if they're upset? My father-in-law, on the other hand, would kindly ask me various things when I called. He asked if there were any difficulties at work, if my husband was treating me well, and so on. He didn't order me around like my mother-in-law. And if I said I had a hard time, my father-in-law always took my side. Even when I talked about conflicts of opinion with my husband, he always sided with me. I didn't want to call my mother-in-law, but I called my father-in-law more often because he said I should. When my mother-in-law asked me why I didn't call her every day, I told her I had talked to my father-in-law. My mother-in-law hesitated for a moment, and then said that I should call both of them separately. I didn't call her every day as she wanted. On the days when I called my father-in-law, I didn't call my mother-in-law. It didn't bother me at all to talk to my father-in-law. But I always had a burden in my heart, thinking that my mother-in-law would complain again if I didn't call her. But I still called her about 10 times a month. However, she was always dissatisfied that I didn't call her every day. As I mentioned earlier, she seemed angry when I called her. When I talked to her on the phone, she didn't even answer properly. She mumbled, so I often couldn't understand what she was saying. I really didn't know what to talk about with her every day on the phone. My mother-in-law told us to come to the in-laws' house every weekend. We couldn't do that. The in-laws' house is close to an hour away from our place by car. It wasn't the distance that was far, but rather our hearts. So we went to the in-laws' house about once or twice a month. When we went to the in-laws' house, my mother-in-law would nag me a lot. I didn't call her every day to check on her. We didn't go to the in-laws' house very often. Things like that. and my mother-in-law was always curious about how often my husband and I visited my parents' house. She believed that once you're married, the in-laws should be prioritized over your own family. Therefore, she seemed to be planning to blame me if I visited my parents' house more often than the in-laws. But even before I got married, I didn't visit my parents' house very often. I called my mother frequently, but it wasn't a daily thing. My husband was the same. He was living alone before we got married, and he wasn't the type to frequently visit his home. My mother-in-law is a churchgoer, so there are no ancestral rites at the in-laws' house. My father-in-law is not a Christian, so he had a lot of complaints about this. But he couldn't overcome my mother-in-law's stubbornness, so he just accepted it. My mother-in-law endured harsh treatment from her in-laws, and she often told stories about how she suffered because her sisters-in-law treated her badly. This was actually the complete opposite. According to my husband, my mother-in-law started going to church around the time he entered elementary school. Since then, she stopped preparing food for ancestral rites, and her mother and older sister did it instead. She claimed that she treated her in-laws well, but she had to distance herself from them because they made her suffer. But I never met my grandmother, so I don't know much about that. But my aunt and older sisters-in-law are normal. I didn't meet them very often, but they probably have a lot to say. Knowing that I have no way to verify it, my mother-in-law spoke ill of my husband's relatives. When my father-in-law tried to say something, my mother-in-law would interrupt him. "You just stay quiet." She then said everything she wanted to say. She always boasted about raising her children well, and that her 2 sons grew up to be very good. I agree that my husband and brother-in-law are good people. They are so good that it's hard to believe that such people exist. They have a close brotherly love, so I get along well with my brother-in-law. But I don't think this is because my mother-in-law raised them well. I think it's because they grew up looking at their father's personality and became like him. Anyway, my mother-in-law is a person who takes all the credit for good things and blames others for the bad things. My brother-in-law must have been stressed because of my mother-in-law, just like me. I couldn't stand it and vented to my brother-in-law, but he seemed to hold back. I wondered if he doubted me, and I felt a little hurt. But it wasn't that he doubted me, he just seems to be the type of person who dislikes bad-mouthing others behind their backs, even if they really make him angry. About a year before I cut ties with the in-laws, my brother-in-law distanced himself first. He didn't cut ties like I did. There was a time when he won second place in the lottery, and he bought expensive beef for all the family members at the in-laws' house. He did the same for his parents' house. At the dinner, I said that he must have received good fortune, because he's a good person. And I enjoyed the beef happily. But my mother-in-law harassed my brother-in-law, because he didn't give her any money when he had some spare change. She told him that he should give her half of his winnings. My brother-in-law expressed his refusal through his younger brother, but my mother-in-law called him and cursed at him, calling him an ungrateful wretch. I wonder what makes my brother-in-law an ungrateful wretch. Should a daughter-in-law share half of her earnings with her mother-in-law when she comes into money? I found this quite absurd, but my brother-in-law didn't completely cut ties with the in-laws. If it were me, I would have cut ties with my mother-in-law for a lifetime after hearing such foul words. The reason I briefly cut ties with my in-laws started from a trivial matter. My mother-in-law said in a gathering, "You're blessed because you married a good husband." At that time, I said to my mother-in-law, "That's true. But I don't think I'm blessed because of you." Upon hearing my words, my mother-in-law shouted in anger. She screamed that there's no mother-in-law as good as her. I thought I might really curse back at her, so my husband and I returned home. My mother-in-law kept shouting at my back until I left the in-laws' house. She called my husband and said we should live without seeing each other again. From then on, we didn't go to the in-laws' house. My husband didn't visit often either. It was heartbreaking, but we didn't contact my father-in-law. He often asked my husband how I was doing. I thought I would live without seeing my in-laws for the rest of my life. But as time passed, my feelings mellowed. I felt sorry for my father-in-law, so I tried to reconnect with my in-laws. I didn't have the confidence to talk to my mother-in-law. So my husband called her first, and we went to the in-laws' house on the weekend. My father-in-law treated me the same as before. My mother-in-law said to me, "You seem to have grown up now." I couldn't control my expression, and my heart was pounding at her words. My mother-in-law was saying something else, but I couldn't hear her. In the middle of her talk, she said, "What parents won't accept their child when they come to admit their mistake?" I didn't want to hear my mother-in-law's words anymore. I told her that I came for nothing. I said that I didn't do anything wrong. So I didn't need to apologize to her, and left the in-laws' house. I told my mother-in-law that I won't visit again, and won't contact her. I had visited on the off chance, but my mother-in-law hadn't changed at all. Why didn't I realize that? I spent a few days in self-reproach. I felt sorry for my father-in-law and my husband, but I concluded that there was nothing I could do. I thought I could meet my father-in-law separately outside later if he wished. Can I live with this mindset? I have confidence, but I think it would be more comforting if you all tell me it's okay. That's why I'm posting this. Thank you for reading until the end.
How can that mother-in-law live such a deceitful life? It seems like the father-in-law is a truly remarkable person. The mental health of the author will affect the growth of her children. I think the author did well, but what do you all think?